My daughter opened her Christmas gift from Grandpa and found it empty. He laughed, saying, "Kids like her shouldn't expect anything. World's got enough leeches already." Then she pulled out her gift for him, a folded piece of paper that would destroy everything he thought he knew about family. I'm Dr. Rachel Bennett, a 34-year-old licensed family therapist with a doctorate in child psychology from Johns Hopkins. I earn $165,000 annually running my private practice in Seattle, specializing in intergenerational trauma and family systems therapy. What my father, Frank, didn't know was that I'd been documenting his systematic abuse patterns for 3 years. I was building a comprehensive case file that would soon expose the truth about our family's toxic dynamics. But first, let me explain how we reached this moment of reckoning. What happened wasn't just a child's innocent gesture. It was the culmination of years of calculated cruelty finally meeting its match. The day started like every other forced family gathering, with me questioning my professional judgment. As a trained therapist, I knew better than to expose my 7-year-old daughter, Kaya, to this environment. But she'd been asking about her grandfather for months, wondering why we never visited, why she didn't have the extended family her classmates talked about. "Mom, do I have a grandpa?" she'd asked 3 weeks before Christmas. Her innocent question cut through my carefully constructed explanations about why holidays were just the two of us. Against every therapeutic principle I'd learned, I'd said yes, and when she asked if we could visit him, I made the mistake that would change everything. I agreed. Frank Bennett lived in the same house where I'd grown up, a cold, sterile monument to his need for control. My mother had died when I was 16, leaving me alone with a man who viewed emotions as weakness and children as burdens to be tolerated. The house reflected his personality, expensive furniture arranged with museum-like precision, not a single item out of place, no warmth or comfort anywhere. My sister Sandra, now 38 and working as a real estate agent, had inherited Frank's cruel streak. She'd never married, never had children, and seemed to take perverse pleasure in making others feel inadequate. My brother Matt, 31, was Frank's golden child, a corporate lawyer who'd learned to stay silent during family conflicts, preserving his position as the favored son. As we pulled into the driveway that Christmas morning, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. Kaya looked up at the imposing house with wide eyes, clutching the handmade drawings she'd spent weeks creating for each family member. "They're going to love your pictures, sweetheart," I told her, though my professional training screamed warnings about the psychological damage that was about to unfold. Frank answered the door in his typical manner, a grunt that passed for greeting, barely acknowledging Kaya's shy, "Hi, Grandpa." He was 68 years old, retirement wealthy from his construction company, and had spent decades perfecting the art of making people feel unwelcome in his presence. The gift exchange was scheduled for after dinner, a formal affair that Frank orchestrated like a business transaction. Kaya had arranged her carefully wrapped drawings under the artificial tree. Her excitement was palpable as she watched the other presents pile up around them. Then came the moment that would haunt me as both a mother and a professional. Frank handed Kaya a beautifully wrapped box, silver paper with an elaborate red bow. Her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that makes childhood magical. "For me," she whispered, running her small fingers over the wrapping paper like it was made of gold. I watched as she carefully unwrapped it, preserving every piece of tape, folding the paper neatly. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Even Sandra and Matt seemed curious about what Frank had chosen for his only grandchild. Kaya lifted the lid and peered inside. Her expression shifted from excitement to confusion, then to something that made my heart shatter, the realization that she'd been deliberately hurt. The box was empty, completely, intentionally empty. Frank's response was immediate and cruel. He laughed, a harsh sound that filled the silent room. "Kids like her shouldn't expect anything. World's got enough leeches already." The psychological impact was instantaneous and devastating. I watched my daughter's face crumble as she processed not just the empty box, but the deliberate cruelty behind it. This wasn't a mistake or forgotten gift. This was calculated emotional abuse designed to make a 7-year-old feel worthless. Sandra, never one to miss an opportunity for cruelty, added her own poison. She's just like her mother, always expecting handouts, worthless. That's when my professional training kicked in alongside my parental fury. I recognized this pattern. The systematic devaluation, the coordinated attack on a child's self-worth, the deliberate infliction of psychological harm. This wasn't just family dysfunction. This was textbook emotional abuse. But Kaya surprised everyone, including me. Instead of crying or running away, she reached into her coat pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of paper. "I got you a gift too, Grandpa," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Frank looked amused, expecting another child's drawing he could dismissively ignore. But as he unfolded that paper and read what Kaya had written, something extraordinary happened. His face went white. His hands started shaking. Without a word, he stood up and left the room, walking down the hallway like a man who'd just seen a ghost. The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra demanded to know what was on the paper, but Frank had taken it with him, leaving us all staring at his empty chair. What Frank didn't know was that Kaya's drawing wasn't a picture at all. It was a letter, dictated by a 7-year-old but informed by everything I'd told her about her grandmother. The woman she'd never met but who had been described as the only person who could make Frank laugh, the only one who could soften his cruel edges. "Dear Grandpa," the letter read, "Mommy told me about Grandma and how she made you happy. I drew you a picture in my mind of you smiling because I think Grandma would want you to be nice to me. She would want you to love me because I'm your family too. I hope you remember how to be happy again. Love, Kaya." It was innocent, heartfelt, and devastatingly effective. In her child's wisdom, Kaya had reached through 30 years of grief and bitterness to touch the one part of Frank that might still remember how to feel, but the real impact wouldn't be clear for several days. We left that morning, cutting the visit short. I couldn't bear to subject Kaya to another moment in that toxic environment, and I had professional obligations to consider. As a mandated reporter, I was witnessing emotional abuse, even if the victim was my own daughter. 4 days later, a package arrived at our door. No return address, just Kaya's name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was an antique music box, clearly expensive, with a note. "To the bravest girl I know. Thank you for remembering her." But that wasn't the end. Over the following weeks, more packages arrived. A college fund account with $50,000 already deposited. A letter to me, filled with apologies I'd never expected to hear. And most surprisingly, a request for family therapy sessions. Frank, it turned out, had been carrying 30 years of guilt over my mother's death. 30 years of grief that had curdled into cruelty. Kaya's letter hadn't just reminded him of his late wife. It had forced him to confront what she would think of the man he'd become. As a professional, I understood the psychology behind his transformation. Grief can manifest as anger, especially when left untreated. Frank had spent 3 decades punishing everyone around him for a loss he couldn't process. Kaya's innocent words had cracked through that defensive wall, forcing him to face emotions he'd buried since my mother died in 1993. The family therapy sessions that followed were intensive and revealing. Frank disclosed financial information that shocked everyone. His construction company had been worth $3, now millions, when he sold it in 2018. He'd been sitting on substantial wealth while watching his daughter struggle as a single mother, using money as another form of control. Sandra's reaction to the family changes was predictably negative. She'd built her identity around being the good daughter who stayed close to Frank, receiving his approval through shared cruelty toward me. When Frank began changing, when he started showing genuine affection for Kaya and respect for my professional accomplishments, Sandra felt displaced. The breaking point came during our fourth family session when Frank announced he was updating his will. Instead of leaving everything to Matt and Sandra as previously planned, he was creating a more equitable distribution. This included substantial provisions for Kaya's education and my practice. Sandra exploded, screaming about manipulation and that brat turning Frank against his real family. Her mask finally slipped completely, revealing the depth of her resentment and cruelty. Frank's response was swift and decisive. "I've wasted 30 years being angry at the wrong people," he said calmly. "Rachel lost her mother too, but she didn't let it turn her into something ugly. She became a doctor, raised a beautiful daughter, and tried to build bridges I kept burning. You, Sandra, have spent those same 30 years feeding off my anger like a parasite." The financial implications were staggering. Sandra had been counting on inheriting Frank's estate, using that expectation to maintain a lifestyle beyond her real estate income. Matt had planned to expand his law practice with his inheritance. Both siblings suddenly faced the reality that their futures looked very different than they'd assumed. But the most significant change was in Frank himself. The therapy sessions revealed a man who'd been trapped in his own grief, using cruelty as armor against further emotional pain. Kaya's letter had reminded him of who he used to be, before loss hardened him into someone his wife wouldn't have recognized. 6 months after that disastrous Christmas morning, Frank sold his house and moved into a smaller place near us. He decided to spend his remaining years building the relationship with his granddaughter that he'd almost destroyed before it began. Kaya, with the resilience that children possess, forgave more easily than I did. But she also gained something invaluable: the knowledge that kindness can triumph over cruelty, that love can crack through even the hardest hearts, and that sometimes the most powerful gift you can give someone is the reminder of who they used to be. The empty gift box now sits in my office, a reminder of how quickly emotional abuse can occur and how important it is to address these patterns immediately. But next to it sits the music box Frank gave Kaya, playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a symbol of transformation, redemption, and the power of innocent love to heal generational wounds. Sandra cut contact with the family entirely, unable to accept the new dynamics where cruelty was no longer tolerated or rewarded. She lost not only her expected inheritance, but also the toxic relationship that had defined her identity for decades. Matt maintained a cautious relationship with Frank, but their bond never fully recovered from his complicity in the abuse. His law practice expansion plans crumbled without the expected inheritance funding. Frank, now 69, spends every Saturday with Kaya. They work in his garden, bake cookies, and he tells her stories about her grandmother, the woman whose memory finally saved them all from the cycle of hurt he'd perpetuated for 30 years. The $50,000 college fund has grown to over $75,000 with his continued contributions, ensuring Kaya's educational future is secure. The professional in me knows that not all family stories end with such dramatic transformation. Therapeutic breakthroughs like Frank's are rare, requiring the perfect combination of readiness for change and the right catalyst for growth. But sometimes, just sometimes, a 7-year-old's letter can accomplish what 30 years of anger couldn't destroy: the memory of love, the possibility of redemption, and the courage to choose healing over hurt. Kaya taught us all that Christmas that the most powerful gifts aren't found in boxes under trees. They're found in the courage to love despite being hurt, to hope despite disappointment, and to believe that even the cruelest hearts can remember how to be kind. The empty box had been meant to teach her that she was worthless. Instead, it became the catalyst for teaching an entire family that love, even when it seems lost, can always find its way home.